Yes, Ms. Graham.
Thank you. Can we look again at your inquiry statement, please? I'm going to look at two paragraphs. We'll just put them on the screen briefly. One's paragraph 18 and one's paragraph 81. So let's look at 18 first of all. And you knew that a police officer had been injured, and part of your instruction mentioned Nicole Short's body armour to be examined for a possible footprint, and the footprint was to be compared with the deceased's footwear, which was seized at Victoria Royal Infirmary in Kirkcaldy at the time of the recovery of the body. And that's the boots that we looked at before lunch. And then paragraph 81, and do we see you say, to clarify, I can see in the background information that we had, there was something about punching. Bio allegedly punched and kicked one of the officers on the head and body. A struggle then ensued between police officers and Sheku Bio. We're looking to see if there was anything from her clothing and his shoes to show that his shoes had made contact with her vest. So that's really the aim of what you're trying to do.
Yes.
And the background information that you had at that time, when you carried out your examination, was of a kick, not a stamp.
Yes, that's the information there has come directly from the submission form that we had.
So, and who prepares that submission form?
That was a PERC submission form.
So PERC prepare a submission form, that comes into your system, is it? Is it on the system?
Yes, it's submitted to the laboratory with the productions or the items that they want looked at. So they have to bring a submission form with the items.
And does that give you the background or the background that you're provided with?
Yes.
To assist you with your examination?
Yes.
You didn't have any other additional information, did you, about the circumstances at the time you did your examination?
I had the information that I'd been provided with at the vehicle that I'd been to examine, and then basically we're going from the submission forms that we had. I think one of my other colleagues had attended a strategy meeting early on where it was discussed what items were to come in, but that would just have the same information as we were provided with.
And that was my fault, I should have been clear. The information you have, but that was in relation to the vest?
Yes.
Rather than other information about a vehicle?
Yes.
Can we look at paragraph 20, please, of your inquiry statement? And I think here you talk about receiving an instruction from DSI William Little from PERC, and it's PERC paperwork that we have, and that's submitted on the 14th of May 2015. I think before lunch you said you thought it was about the 14th.
Yes, 14th or 15th.
And you were given a number of items, and you've listed them there in paragraph 20 for the chair to consider. And again, you detail there that the information you have was, you'll see sort of halfway down, just below halfway down the screen, that Bio allegedly punched and kicked one of the officers on the head and body.
Yes.
Thank you. And again, there's no mention in that set of instructions about a stamp being alleged.
No.
Thank you. If you had been told when you were doing your examination in May that a stamp was alleged, or more than one stamp had allegedly occurred, would that have made any difference to the work that you were doing?
No, we were looking at the vest to look and see if there was any footwear marks on it. So if they've been there from being kicked or being stood on or being stamped on, if we'd seen a footwear mark there, we would have examined it.
Yeah. Can we look at paragraph 23, please? And I think you say here that prior to your examination, the item, the vest, had gone to biology. Is that a separate department in the SPA?
Yes, it is.
And why did it go there first?
I don't know. I'm assuming that they're looking for DNA or biological material. Maybe it was blood pattern examination. We don't particularly look at what they're asked to do. We just know that they had the vest first.
Right. And can we look at label PERC 01176, please. Now, I think this is photographs that were taken. Am I right in saying that these photographs were actually taken by the biology lab, or as part of their examination, or am I wrong in that?
I don't see any photographs just
sorry.
now.
If we'll start with photograph 18, you'll see that. So some of these contain the knives that we've looked at earlier, and some contain the boots. We'll go through these in a moment. And some contain photographs of the vest. If we can go to 18. Is it just doing it automatically? 18, please. Of this. Oh, yes. If it's not working, it's fine. We'll leave it. If it seems to be glitching for some reason.
Okay.
So there were photographs taken. There are 55 photographs in this item. And some of them contain photographs of the boots, and some of them contain photographs of the knives, and some of them contain photographs of the vest. And you maybe saw some of them scrolling past very quickly there. Who took those photographs?
Well, very quickly as it scrolled past, I saw the initials RES, which is Robert Smith, which is a scene examiner for SPA. And I know that we did have him take photos of some of the items. Whether those are all his photos or not, I don't know. But Robert Smith certainly photographed some items for us.
We'll maybe try again and see if we can get it to work this time. If not, we'll leave that. So, in the absence of those photos, can I ask you, I've looked through those photos and there don't appear to be any photographs of the soles of the boots that we looked at before lunch.
Okay.
And I know that you examined the soles of the boots. Was there a reason there was no photograph taken of the soles?
No, I don't think so. I think these photographs were potentially taken before we had the items, because I saw a radio or something there which we didn't have submitted to the lab. So if all these photos were taken at the one time, that's before we saw them. But we take lifts from the soles of the shoes, so we're actually doing a comparison with the lift that we take directly from the shoe soles ourselves.
Rather than photographs.
Rather than photographs.
So if we look at paragraph 41 of your inquiry statement, and this actually explains to the chair that you do take lifts from the soles of the shoes that you were examining, and you took copies of those and put them onto acetate sheets so that they are see-through but the pattern's there, and we would overlay that acetate onto a mark. And if you're doing a comparison, we might have a photograph or a gel lift on an item of clothing, and we would use that acetate to compare against any mark that we saw on those items. Would you explain to the chair what you mean by the process that you're describing?
Okay, so when we have the shoe soles, we dust them with powder, and then we have a sticky piece of plastic, an acetate sheet, that we put against the sole of the shoe, and when we peel it off, it's left with a pattern that's present on the sole of the shoe. We then put another piece of acetate sheet over the top of it to cover up the sticky surface, which means we are able to touch both sides of the lift from the pattern of the soles, and we can use that by, if we have a mark here for example, we can overlay it and we can manipulate the acetate sheet round to see if we can have any correlation between the shoe pattern and the mark on the item.
Thank you. And would you look for me please at some acetates, SPA 24 and 25 please. So this is SPA 24, it says right boot acetate. So is this the acetate that you took from the right boot that we looked at before lunch?
Yes, this is the acetate from the right boot.
And then SPA 25 should be the left boot that we looked at, the acetate you took from the left boot.
Yes, this is the one that was taken from the left boot.
And can we go back to the right boot, please, 24? Now, if we scroll down the page, thank you, we can see the full mark from the sole of the boot.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could just describe to the chair what markings or areas that you can identify yourself and describe those for us.
We have different shaped blocks on the sole of the shoe. We have up the centre of the sole and in the centre of the heel you have what we would describe as double triangles. It's two triangle shapes with the bases towards each other, and around the edges there are just various shaped blocks that we would be looking at. And in the recess between the sole and the heel you can just make it out that it says Urban Logic.
In the centre?
Yes, in the centre.
Right. And can we look at the number 25, please? And again, if we can see that. And actually, do we see the Urban Logic a little more clearly?
It's a little more clear in this
It's
image,
reversed.
Yes.
So if someone was leaving a mark on an item, it would come out the correct way round, presumably, if you were standing on earth or something soft.
Yes, you would see
the actual.
You'd see it the way that the shape of the foot. So yes, if the item was stood on by the left foot, that is the shape that we would see there, as if you're looking through the sole of your foot.
Right. Thank you. And again, do we see these double triangular shapes on that sole?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. And then can we look at SPA 23, 00023, and if we can look at the top of that, do we see this is headed Footwear Examination Record, and the description of the item is given as right boot and taken from Victoria Hospital. And then if we go down, and it says upper general condition good, damage to upper none, dirty it says, and general description of right boot is there. When it says none dirty, can you explain what that meant?
Yes, so I've noted that the boot was dirty, so there would be dirt or soil potentially on the surface, and they don't look clean, freshly polished, but there was no damage to them, like cuts or big scuffs or holes in them, for example.
Thank you. And then sole heel unit damage, very worn in places, original pattern in others, trapped stones, small cuts. What does that mean?
So when we look at the sole of the shoe, the edge blocks had some parts of it looked quite smooth and some part looked almost stippled. So the stippling would be what we would say would be the original pattern, and the other part has been worn flat. There's obviously little bits of stone trapped within the tread elements, and the small cuts are, when we're doing a footwear comparison, you can look at the pattern and the size and the layout of the pattern elements on the shoe, and depending on the surface that you're looking at, for example, if it was on this wooden bench, you might have fine detail, which would be the small unique damage features or small features of damage within that. Generally you don't see those on fabric because of the texture and the background substrate.
And if you had found dirt or mud or earth of some description on the sole, is that the area of the report you would have noted it?
We would have written that in the heel damage unit area, yes.
So in the absence of anything like that, can the chair assume that you did not find dirt or mud or earth?
Yes, if we'd found big sort of pieces of mud trapped in, then that would have been noted at that point, yeah.
And equally, although I'm talking about dirt, if there was another substance present on the sole, is that the area where you would have noted that if it had existed.
Yes.
Thank you. Can we go down, please? And you say sole heel unit pattern description, and you mention the double triangles and the Urban Logic logo. And carry on, please. And then we see bag contains one brown boot and a plastic bag containing a piece of folded brown paper from biology or DNA exam. And then can we go down onto the next page? And do we see this is the left boot that's been examined? And again, if we go further down, we see the upper general condition, damage to upper, none, dirty, so the same as the right boot.
Yes.
And then the sole heel unit damage, very worn in places, original pattern in others, trapped stones, small cuts. Again, that seems to be the same as the other boot.
Yes, that's correct.
And does the position will be the same regarding anything else? If you'd found it on the sole, you would have noted it there.
Yes.
And is this your writing?
It is my writing, yes.
So these are your notes?
Yes.
Good. And then can we go down, please, further? Stop, please. On the left-hand side, it says sole heel unit wear, and it says heavy. Wear distribution, ball, outer, subsole. I'm not sure what the next word
It says
is.
viewable.
Viewable at one point.
Yes.
Right. Thank you. And is that an area that could have been noticeable if a mark had been made?
Yes, or you would see the wear potentially on the item that a footwear mark had transferred onto.
So you're looking for all these areas which might be unique features on these soles?
Yes, we're looking at the overall pattern as well, but part of what we're looking for is features within that specific shoe.
Thank you. And then carry on, please, going further down. And then we see, again, reference to the bag that it came within, and then go further down, please. And the date is the 14th of August, is that 2015, and then, examined by, and it's redacted, the 14th of August, and then another examined by, and that's the 19th of August. So is that when you and Miss Chin examined these items?
That is when we have signed off our final notes for that page. The examination will have taken place between when the items were submitted and all the way through, and that's when we've done our final sign-off of all the sheets.
Thank you very much. And I wonder if we could look at paragraphs 37 and 38 of your inquiry statement, please. And you said here, we're back to thinking about the vest here. We don't have a photo of the mark in the file. Looking at the soles of the shoe, there's a different pattern elements within that. There are small triangles and there's slightly different shaped blocks. Was that the areas around the outside of the sole? And can we look at SPA 28, please? And if we go to the top, please, it says General Examination Record. And this relates to Nicole Short's vest. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Whose writing is this?
This is Shirley Chin's writing.
Right, this is her writing. And this relates to the vest. And if we could go down, please. There's mention of the vest. And then you'll see it says front left black pocket of vest has light coloured markings on surface. Could be dirt rubbed on surface or part of a mark, question mark. Pocket contained latex gloves. Front right black vest pocket has similar discoloration, staining on surface, empty pocket. Light coloured staining noted near neckline, shoulder area of vest, possibly makeup, question mark. Areas of dark staining noted on the back of the high vis. Something
layer, sorry, that's Shirley's writing. It's layer.
Police badge, and then it's a different pen. Is this your writing?
Yes,
then?
this is my writing now.
And you described before lunch how you combine. Sometimes Miss Chin will write things in the notes and sometimes you, depending on what you see.
Yes.
So this is an example of something you wrote to yourself.
Yes.
And it says, marks on the jacket possibly included a triangle. Possible that this is one of the elements from the shoes of the deceased, but there is really insufficient detail resolution of marks for any meaningful comparison. Can I ask you, what did you mean when you wrote that?
When I looked at the vest, there was the darker area of staining. Because there was nothing identifiable as a full footwear mark, I'm just trying to give myself an indication of what I'm seeing on the vest. And there was one area that I considered that could potentially have been a triangle. We know that there was triangles on the sole of the shoe because we have the shoes, and it was to show that we've considered that there are potentially a triangle on the vest, potentially triangles on the shoes, and whether those triangles on the shoes could have been responsible for the one on the vest. So we're just showing that we're looked at it, and it's to indicate sometimes the marks on an item, they're quite nondescript and you can't really put a proper description of what their shape is. This one, it was a potential triangle, and it was just to show that we'd actually considered all the pieces that we could see.
So possibly included a triangle, and you've referred to triangles on the soles of the boots.
Yes.
So you have considered that as a possibility.
We did.
But having considered that as a possibility, you've said there was insufficient detail or resolution of the marks for any meaningful comparison.
Yes.
What's a meaningful comparison?
So for one pattern element, just a triangle, it's not a unique shape. To say that the triangle was from a certain item, if you've only got one pattern element, that would be quite misleading. If you haven't got any of the other pattern elements round about, there's obviously differences in the substrate with how a mark will be made onto an item. It might be curved, it might be flat, the different textures of the material. So for a meaningful comparison, there's nothing more meaningful other than one has a triangle and the other one also has a triangle. You're not saying it's not a specific, unique shape.
If you were looking for a meaningful comparison,
yes,
how much additional information would you be looking for?
It really depends on the substrate that the mark is on and what the pattern of the shoes are. It's very case specific, but you'd need to have more than just one pattern element unless you had lots of very fine detail within it that made it unique to that shoe. But even still, I think you wouldn't want to say that it was from that shoe with just one pattern element. And obviously with this one, the resolution and detail within that mark wasn't brilliant itself, so we couldn't even say whether the mark on the vest had been a triangle to start with, or whether, like I explained earlier, the folds in the material, we didn't know. We were definitely seeing all the edges, so we wouldn't have linked that.
All right, thank you. Can we look? I wonder if we could look at some photos of the vest again, if that's going to be possible. So they were 1176 photos, 47 to 50, but let's see if we can get those to come up on the screen. Oh, lovely. And they would be right at the very end, 47 to 50. Oh, that's lovely. That's great. Thank you. Let's stick with that. Would you be able to explain to the chair, when you said possible triangle, what area of the mark you're referring to?
On this image, with the two horizontal stripes on the vest running vertically, it would be the area to the right of that, so closer towards the police badge, but the very sort of end mark, there's three very quite dark marks.
Now
down
let me
at the
just
bottom.
check. We do have a facility for some of the things we show on the screen to circle things with a red circle, but I don't know if that's something that's going to be possible. Right. We have a facility on the screen.
Okay.
You can touch the screen and a red circle will appear, and if you want to move it around you can put your finger in it and move it. So try that now, and then if it doesn't work we can take it away and you can try again. Right.
sort of here.
Okay. So maybe we could have a bigger circle, I think, because the one sort of covers quite a large part of the circle. Let's take those away and let's try and get a bigger red circle, if that's possible.
How do I make it bigger?
If you don't touch it for the moment, we'll wait for Miss Smith to set it up.
Oh, sorry.
And then we'll get the nod from her. Right, let's try this. It should give you a bigger circle now. Lovely. So that's the dark marks where you thought possible triangle.
Yes, it's the bit closest to the centre. That would be the possible triangle shape.
Is that the sort of larger of the marks that we see there, if I could describe it that way?
Yes, the kind of bit that's pointier towards the top.
So that's the part that is the possible triangle.
Yes.
And can we go back and look at the acetate, please, which was 00024, SPA 00024. This would be the acetate from the right boot. And that's the triangles that we see on
Yes.
from the acetate. And again, can we go back just very briefly to that last photograph? And that was 1176, and it would be perhaps photograph 48. So that's the mark on the vest, which was a
Yes.
possible triangle. And your view was that there was insufficient to connect the sole or the shoe or the shoes and the mark on the vest.
Yes. If you look at the part that I've described as the possible triangle shape, you'll see that there's two sides, but the base part isn't a fully straight line. So that's why we couldn't even be sure that it was definitely a triangle to start with. And that's why it's a possible triangle shape, and that there was insufficient for a comparison with an item.
So the triangles on the soles of the boots from the acetate have a definite defined line at the bottom,
Yes, they do.
and that does not have a defined line at the bottom.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, looking at that photograph, can I ask you about something else? Do you see if someone was wearing that vest, where the right arm would be? So we see just lying on the table there, we see inside the hem, if you like, inside the right arm
Yes.
area. And it appears from this photograph that there are some darker marks there. Do you see those?
I do see some small markings there, yes.
Did you examine inside the vest as well as outside?
Yes, because we had to unzip it to put it in our VSC equipment, so we would have had it and looked at both sides.
Was there anything inside the vest or inside that area in the right arm area that was of any significance?
Not to my memory, no.
Could you tell if it was the same type of mark inside as well as outside?
I don't remember, sorry.
Could you form any view about whether the substance of the mark, so the composition of the mark, was the same inside as out?
I'm sorry, I don't really remember the mark inside, other than I can see a little bit of it there. But
Okay.
because we were looking for footwear marks and patterns, that's what we were mainly looking for.
Thank you. And can you perhaps use the demonstration model of the vest to show us the area on the vest where that mark or those marks appear to be inside? So it appears to be on the right hand side.
So here would be where the possible triangle shape would be, and the darker marks that are shown in the photograph look like they're a little bit perhaps on the inside of here, this bit.
The sort of seamed hem
The seamed
area.
hem area. And maybe a little bit on this.
You've described earlier, sorry, you can put that down, please. You described earlier how you would take your acetate, you could touch both sides of it,
Yes.
and you would match it up when you were doing your comparison.
Yes, we would overlay it.
You would overlay it, and you would match up and see if the acetate marks matched up with the marks you could see on the vest.
Yes, we would.
And did you carry out that
Yes, we
comparison
did.
process? And did the acetate marks that you could, or the marks you could see on the acetate from the soles, match the marks that could be seen on the vest?
No, we found that there was insufficient detail there for us to orientate the footwear mark from the soles of the shoe with the marks that we were finding on there, and that's why there was insufficient for a meaningful comparison. We couldn't orientate it in any way.
Thank you. Can we look at your inquiry statement again, please, just for a moment? Paragraphs 48 to 51. So that it would start with 48. You were shown some photographs of the vest by the inquiry team, and you see there's a curved bit towards the armhole area and slightly towards the most right hand side of that, and you talk about a possible triangle, and then you say at 49 there are 3 dark patches in a row, and then there are 2 lines. The left one's a line, the middle one's a top to bottom line, and the third one looks like a capital A. Is that the area that you've just pointed out to us on the photographs?
Yes, it was quite difficult to describe over the way the statement was taken when in different locations, and people couldn't point to things very easily, but yes.
No, that's fine. But the area that we just looked at in the photographs, where we were talking about a possible triangle,
Yes.
would that be the capital A
Yes,
area?
that's right.
Thank you. And then paragraphs 50 and 51, you mention, 50, first of all, you mention the triangle, a tiny little bit of a mark on the reflective strip, that you've kind of got the triangle A shape, then just to the left there's a line, then there's a line that's almost down to the right. It's kind of in a curve of the armhole, not quite parallel, but it almost follows that shape. And then at 51 you see that's why we would have put it under different light sources to see if we could see anything else coming up, because it's on the different fabric type. So we'd have looked at different things, but we didn't get any extra marks coming up. I mean, that could be oil or from anything. Somebody could have leant against an oily hinge or an oily pool, or it's just dirty, dark marks. And so you did go to the effort of putting it under different light sources to see if you could get any more detail from it.
Yes, we did.
But none of that was successful.
No, we didn't see any more detail coming up when we looked at the vest under the different light sources.
So really what can be seen on the vest by the naked eye is really what can be seen on the vest.
Yes.
There's nothing hidden from the naked eye.
Not with the light sources that we looked at, and that's why we forwarded the vest to the Mark Enhancement Lab, because they have different techniques that they can use.
And we've heard about some of those different techniques earlier today. And is it your understanding that the Mark Enhancement Lab carried out some further tests?
Yes, it is.
And did you receive a phone call at some stage for them to confirm that those had been done and nothing further to help you was found?
Yes, I think there was a phone call between the chemistry and the Mark Enhancement Lab, and I believe there's actually an email where it's confirmed with Laura asking if we needed the vest back or could it be put out, and we were finished with the vest because nothing else had shown up.
And although there's no more in your report about the work done by Mel, is that because nothing was found?
That's because that would be up to Mel to report their own work and their own examinations. If something had shown up, then the mark would have been photographed to scale, and we could have used that photograph to do further comparison work with. But we wouldn't report on their activities doing there. We would be doing the comparison with the mark that was generated, the photograph that would be generated after their examination.
So if Mel had come up with something, found something in addition, a different process would have been followed, but in the end nothing was found, and that was the end of your examination.
Yes, if Mel had found any additional markings, it would have been photographed to scale, and we would have had the photograph to do a comparison with the shoes that we had.
And that would have been further work done by you?
That would have been by myself and Shirley, yes.
Thank you. Can I look at paragraph 30 of your inquiry statement, please? And you say there, it's a little bit difficult to describe the comparison process using this case because there was no obvious footwear mark that needed a comparison done between it and the footwear. Although there wasn't really any obvious comparison to take place, we would both have still looked at the vest to see if we thought there was anything there. And we've heard evidence, obviously, in this inquiry from some witnesses who thought the mark was a footwear mark, and you've obviously said here there was no obvious footwear mark. Can you explain to us, from your perspective, what does an obvious footwear mark look like?
So an obvious footwear mark would be one where you could maybe see the shape of the shoe, the obvious sort of right or left, or you'd be able to see a pattern that you could see the footwear pattern elements within them.
So like we see on the acetate?
Yes, like you see on an acetate.
Thank you. Can I ask you about paragraphs 37 and 38 of your inquiry statement, please? This covers the shape of the mark, and you talk there about the triangles. 30, when we looked at the outer layer of the vest, there's obviously been a slightly darker mark, which may or may not have been a triangle shape, so a possible triangle shape. Sometimes, if it's just one element or shape in its own, from what I'm reading there, possibly included a triangle. Sometimes you get marks on an item of clothing that's flexible material because there's folds in the fabric when the mark has been made. So there might be a scuff, but when it's straightened out, you see it straightened out, you get a gap down the middle between the edges of it. It might look like a triangle at that shape, but it wasn't a triangle when the mark was made. Can I ask you about some of the things you say here? You've talked about material being flexible.
Yes.
Can you tell us what your views are about the type of material that the vest is made from? Is that what you would call flexible material?
Yes, it's quite easy to manipulate and change the direction that the fabric's sitting in.
And does that have an impact on the marks that could be left if something is transferred onto it?
Yes, because some of the material could be bunched up when an item comes in contact with it. So if we then get the vest to look at where the fabric is straightened out, it's not always easy to see that it's a footwear mark because it's changed from the original orientation and layout of how the fabric was.
So that the movement of material can impact on the way a shape transfers onto that item?
Yes, it can, or how it's viewed afterwards.
How it's viewed after. And you mention a scuff. Now obviously I've asked you about a stamp and I've asked you about a kick. What's a scuff?
Just a sort of glancing mark. If two items come into contact with each other sort of briefly, then you might be left with a scuff. If you scuff your shoe, or you've got a slight transfer there.
And if it's a scuff, does that make it harder to see a defined shape or a defined area?
Yes, because it's not the same as looking at the sole pattern where you've got distinctive pattern elements. It would depend very much on what shape the item that has come into contact to leave that transfer behind is.
And when you're thinking about a stamp, a kick or a scuff, does one of those mechanisms provide better quality footprint marks?
It very much depends on the surface that the mark is going to be made on, but anything with a sort of full contact with the sole pattern, whether, as I say, it depends on what your fabric that you're going on to is, whether it's a wood or whether it's
Assume it's
glass,
a vest like
this.
that.
It would depend on how dirty the soles were, and yeah, you might get better transfer from a scuff because it's from a different part of a shoe potentially, but then it's not as easy to do a comparison with because you've not got the shapes that you're looking for. So we're looking for contact of the footwear with, it might be a mark you sometimes see from the sides of a shoe, so you could get the profile of the sole and you might be able to take a lift from the side of the shoe to compare against that, but we didn't see anything in this case that we could link anything back to.
If we have heard evidence about a stamp or more than one stamp onto the back of the officer who was wearing a vest like that, that's a demo vest, in the lower back or the kidney area.
Okay.
You gestured there with your hands, and I don't know if the chair was able to see that because you've got a screen in front of you, but you had your hand flat out and then you moved your hand flat on top. So if there was a stamp by a person wearing a shoe onto the back of that vest, is that the type of mechanism that could provide a mark, a footprint mark onto that vest if the shoe or the sole was dirty or had some substance on it?
Yes, that's a possible way that a footwear mark could be transferred onto a vest from a shoe.
Thank you. If there was no substance on the sole, no dirt or oil or anything of that nature on the sole, could that shoe still transfer a dirty mark or a mark like the one we saw on the vest?
You would, if you had contact between the sole of the shoe and the vest, obviously there could be slight residue from the rubber or whatever the sole is made from onto the vest, but it might not leave a visible mark, and I wouldn't expect a dark mark to be visible on the item of clothing if there had been nothing dark on the surface that's coming into contact with it. So if the shoe soles had been quite clean and there was no dirty dark marks on it, I wouldn't expect a dirty dark mark to be left on the vest from the soles.
Now, we looked at your notes of the soles of the Urban Logic boots.
Yes.
And we looked at the area, and I said to you at the time, is that where you would note dirt or earth or another type of substance? And there wasn't anything like that in your notes.
No.
We discussed that. So if we assume boots in the condition that you saw them, like the Urban Logic boots, would you expect anything to be transferred onto a vest like that?
From the soles of the shoe, as we saw them, I didn't see anything that I thought would necessarily have made a dark mark on the vest. But obviously things may have been removed from the soles of the shoe before we got them, and that's why we are using the different lighting techniques as well to see if there's any other marks there that isn't visible to the naked eye, and we would use the different light sources for that.
And you wouldn't be in a position to speak to whether things had been removed from the soles. You're talking about the examination and the state they are when you see them yourself in your laboratory.
Yes.
Right. Can I look at paragraph 40, please? And you say, in our notes we haven't noted the size, but I had noted in your report UK size 10.
Yes, so when we were talking in the statement when we're talking about the size here, we're talking about the size of the triangle as opposed to the size of the shoe.
Right, sorry. But we've just said there's really insufficient detail to even know that it is a mark from the shoes. It's just that there's a possibility of a triangle that's there. But we would have looked with the overlay at the time, but because there wasn't enough to do a proper comparison with, because there's insufficient detail in there, we wouldn't be able to relate that definitively back to the shoe. Where, apart from the triangle, were there any other similarities that you identified between the shoes that you had to look at and the vest?
No, the only mark that we saw that was a possibility was the triangle, and that's why we noted it in our examination notes, but it wasn't put into the report because we felt that would be misleading to say that there was a possible shape there. That's really just for our own detail that it's there. It's an insufficient mark for a comparison purposes.
So it didn't make its way into your final report that we looked at earlier. And were there any inconsistencies between the soles of the shoes that you examined and the mark that you examined on the vest?
Other than we didn't really think there was a mark there that was worthy of doing a comparison with. So you've obviously mentioned that the dark marks on the vest, that we didn't see anything particularly dark on the surface of the shoes, but yeah, it's easier to look at a link between a shoe and a mark than to show that there's not a link, if you know what I mean, between a shoe and a random mark, a non-definitive mark.
Easier to identify the one area where there was the possible triangle.
Yes.
Rather than look at all the other.
Yes, but we didn't see anything where we thought that we could try and get a correlation between the shoe sole and the mark.
Thank you. Can I ask you to look at paragraph 43, please? You talk about the footwear mark and you say, if a full footwear sole has been in contact with a surface, it could be unusual to get only one pattern element present. We've got a possible triangle, but there was nothing else of the pattern of the shoe soles round about it. And then so that's 43, the word unusual appears. And then in 44, you talk about, so it's just a kind of random bit that may or may not have been a triangle. And I wonder if you could just explain to the chair what you mean when you say unusual and a kind of random bit, to give us this sort of in context.
Okay, so when we're looking for a footwear mark, and this was part of, although it's under the section on the shape of the mark, some of the comments within it are to do with a general examination of marks and items, and not just specifically the mark on this vest. So when we're looking for a transfer between a shoe sole and an item, if there has been a full contact with the full sole against the item, depending on what the substance the item is made of is, it may be unusual to only get one pattern element and not have anything else show up. If somebody, for example, stood on this table and the table was dusted, I wouldn't expect to only see one part. If the full sole has come into contact with the table, I wouldn't only expect to see one part of the mark or one pattern element there. I would maybe expect to see more. You might not have the full mark, but you would expect to see more than just one piece. Obviously it depends on the shape. If there's a curvature of the item that's being touched, maybe only part of the item does come into contact with the sole of the shoe, but for a full sole contact, you might expect to see more than one. But again, it might depend on what's on the sole of the shoe, or if there's been something on the vest that's reacted with something that the sole's come into contact with.
And when you're saying a full sole contact, again, you're talking about the surface of the table and you're moving your hand flat down onto the table. So is that akin to a stamp?
That could be considered similar, or a step. It depends how much force is put onto it, whether it would be a stamp or a step. But
and would it, if there was more force used, would that make it more likely to see more of the full sole or the full footprint?
I think it would depend on what your surface you were looking at was, but yes, I would expect if there was a greater force and stronger contact between them, there's potentially, you might see more of a mark left from the item that's been in contact.
Thank you. Can I ask you, you've told us about receiving the information from PERC.
Yes.
Were you ever asked whether you could do further tests on this mark, on the composition of the material, the composition of the substance that the dark mark was made from?
No, we weren't asked specifically about that. I think in one of the submission forms, and I think it's mentioned in the statement somewhere, that they were looking for a forensic link between the footwear and the vest, if there was one. But for us, that question that they were asking at that point was really to look at the footwear mark comparison.
So that's not something you did, to look at the substance?
No, that's not something that we did.
No. Were you ever asked by the Crown to look at the substance of the mark?
No, the only submission forms we had came from PERC.
And that was to look at the footprint, or the possible footprint?
Yes.
And can I ask you, have you any views, if we look at paragraph 53, first of all, you're talking about accelerants analysis, so this is a different part of the process. You say it would have needed to have been in a knotted nylon bag. Now, you've told us already it was a brown bag. But I don't think that would necessarily have even helped anyway, because if it had been oil, you might have just got a hydrocarbon mixture, and we would have needed something to compare against. We didn't have a comparison item of dark staining to make that. But no, I think we were just asked to look to see if the boots could have made that mark. We were looking at the footwear comparison part of it. So you didn't find oil on the soles of the boots?
No, we didn't notice any oil on the soles of the boots.
So there was no question of you doing that accelerants analysis part or examination?
No, and for the accelerants analysis, the items need to have been within knotted nylon bags, because you're looking at the atmosphere within the bag. You're looking at the hydrocarbon ranges that are within the bag, so they have to be airtight, and items that are packaged in brown paper bags are not suitable for examination of that type.
Do you have any views yourself from your own experience of what made that mark? What type of substance it was?
To me, it just looked like a dark, potentially oily stain, dark grease perhaps, but we didn't particularly look far into it. It didn't look like soil to me. It just looked like a dark, dirty mark.
Thank you. And some witnesses suggested they thought it might be dirt. Can I ask you to look at paragraph 55, which is at the bottom of the screen? And you said, I've been asked if I could take samples from the sole of the boot and compare it against the mark on the vest. I think you were asked that by the inquiry team.
Yes.
We don't do soil examination or comparison here with an SPA, so that would have to be somebody else if they were looking at soil comparison. The mark on the vest didn't look like soil to us. It looks darker than the soil that we're seeing on the footwear there in the photograph. What did you mean by that?
So at this point of the discussion, I was shown a photograph of the pair of shoes in the inquiry by the inquiry team, and you could see what looked like, as described previously, dirty on the uppers of the shoes. You could see some kind of what looked like soil there, and it looked completely different in colour from the mark that we could see on the vest.
I wonder if it would be possible to see some photographs of the boots from 1176. Well, while we wait to see if we can get those photographs, can I ask, we've been talking exclusively about the boots that were taken from Mr. Bio in
Yes.
Victoria Hospital. Were you given any other shoes or boots or footwear from officers who'd been at Hayfield Road?
No, we weren't.
So there's, can I just clarify, have you ever carried out a comparison between those items of footwear and the vest?
No, we haven't. We only had the boots from Mr. Bio submitted, so no boots from anywhere else or
Thank
sole
you.
patterns.
Thank you. And just like magic, we have some photographs here of boots from 1176. Let's go through those and see if we can find the one that you were referring to in paragraph 55 of your statement. So we see some of these Urban Logic logoed boots, and perhaps if we stick to this photograph, we can see some marks on the leather upper area of the
Yes.
Is that the type of mark that you were referring
Yes,
to?
it was quite light coloured looking dirt. Totally different from the dark colour that we thought we could see, or we could see on the vest.
On the vest. And then if we look through some of the others. I think that's another photograph of the same upper, but I may be wrong. But again, the marks we see there on the leather upper area,
Yes, they're
that
quite
the type of dirty mark that you'd noted in your report, in your
Yes.
handwritten notes. And again, would you agree? Would you say they were lighter than the mark you could see on the vest?
Yes, I would.
Thank you. Can I ask to go back to your inquiry statement, please? And 56 and 57. This relates to the conclusions in your report. So Shirley has put in the notes that there were areas of dark staining noted on the back. This is about the vest. And then when we've been looking at the vest, when we've had it back out to look under the VSC, Shirley's maybe been doing the manipulation of the garment. So I have added to the notes. That's the notes where that became the blue pen and that was your handwriting.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. And you both signed those notes. If Shirley didn't agree that there was possible shapes there, then she wouldn't have signed the notes.
Yes, she'd have written a comment beneath what I had written and she'd have signed it at that point.
If there'd been any disagreement or dispute between you and Miss Chin, that would have been noted in the notes.
Yes.
Thank you. And it's not there.
It's not there.
Thank you. And then 57, please. Basically in the notes we've said there's a possible triangle. Possible it could be an element from the shoes, but there's really insufficient detail or resolution of the mark for a meaningful comparison. So because we deemed that there was not enough for a meaningful comparison, we thought it would be misleading to say that there is a triangle there, because it may or may not be a triangle and it's not a complete triangle. So that's why we wouldn't have added that in. But that's not unusual. In other footwear cases, we might see fragmentary marks or little bits here and there. But if it's not enough to do a comparison with, we would say that there was insufficient for a meaningful comparison. And really this is confirming why it didn't appear in your report.
Yes.
Thank you. And can I also confirm, you've mentioned, I won't go through all the paragraphs, you've mentioned the items that went to Mel.
Yes.
And that included the knives
Yes, I believe so.
and the vest,
Yes.
but the boots didn't go to Mel.
No. Mel wouldn't have required the boots because they were looking at the vest under different lighting conditions with their equipment to see if they could visualise any other part of the mark. They wouldn't be involved in the comparison aspect, so they wouldn't need the boots. They're looking at the vest and what they can actually see with their different light sources.
Thank you. Can can I ask you, before I move on to the knives, can I ask you to look at Ms Chin's inquiry statement, which is SBPI 00122. I know you haven't seen this before, and it's not in your folder.
Okay, it's like
it's just one paragraph, paragraph 41, and I'd just like to ask you something about that. So this is Ms Chin's inquiry statement, and it's paragraph 41 that I'm keen to look at, please. And this, I'll just read this out. It says, with regards to the mark on the vest, no meaningful comparison could be made between the partial mark and the boots. Since the mark noted was partial, which possibly comprised of two sides in a triangular shape, and it was on its own as a standalone single entity with no other pattern elements in its vicinity, no meaningful comparison could be carried out. The mark could have been made by anything. And do you understand what's being said there by Miss Chin?
Yes.
And is that consistent actually with what you said earlier about the different shapes?
Yes, I think so. She's saying there that there's the triangle shape, but there isn't very much information round about it to help us with identifying whether it came from the sole of the shoe, and it could actually have been made by anything or in any way.
When it says the mark could have been made by anything, does that mean it could have also been made by these boots?
Yes, I mean that's a possibility that it could have been made by those boots, but we didn't have enough to do a proper comparison to link it or not.
So it could have been made by anything, including someone else's boots?
Yes, that's a possibility.
Thank you. Can I move on to the knives, please? We looked at the knives earlier.
Yes.
And I showed you those. And could we look briefly at the report you prepared with Ms Ramage, which is COPFS 113. And this says fingerprint case examination results. And if we could go further down, please.
This is not something that Ruth and I did. This looks like Laura McPhee's.
I can see that. Well, let me just ask you. You did prepare a report with Ms Ramage about the knives.
I did, yes.
And we have spoken about those earlier today before lunch.
Yes.
And I think you commented on the house and home marked on the blade, and we've got some references in your inquiry statement to that.
Yes, so the comparison of the knives with each other was in a report by myself and Shirley Chin. Ruth Ramage and myself looked at casts from the vehicle alongside the knife. So there's a different report for that.
But I don't need to go into that with you today. Well, finally, can I just return to your inquiry statement, please? PERC requests 71 to 73, paragraph 71 to 73. And you'll see PERC requests are mentioned here. I've been asked if I have been contacted by PERC or the Crown for a statement in this case. Certainly not recently. We were asked to do work for them, I think, in 2015, because I think that's who our reports went to. And then we had an email either during the pandemic or just before, telling us anything in emails or any digital files that we had, that we weren't to delete anything and it was all to be kept. But we haven't been asked, I don't think, for a statement from them other than the reports that we produced. We usually do an NSS, which is a national standard statement, but that's basically just the one that's attached onto the emails that you send with the reports. The NSS statement is just basically saying, we were asked to do these things and we've done a report. And it's got our lab number on it and it was signed with whoever. And I just wanted to confirm with you that you've done your report and provided that to PERC or the Crown.
Yes.
But no one ever came back and asked you for a more detailed statement?
No, the statement that I was asked to do for this inquiry by the inquiry team was the first time we've been asked for a statement. I've not been involved with a public inquiry before, but for the normal work that we do, where we do comparison work and produce reports for the requesting body, whether it would be the police or park, then we would provide the reports to them. But I don't think we've ever been asked for anything other than those reports.
So it's not out of the norm, it's not unusual not to be asked for a statement?
No, in fact, I'd say it's more the other way, that it would be more unusual to be asked for a statement than not asked for a statement.
Could you just give me a moment, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, that completes my examination.
Rule 9 applications? No. Ms Marvin, thank you very much for coming to give evidence to the inquiry. I shall be rising in a moment and then you'll be free to go.
Thank you.
Now, Ms Graham, is there any further evidence today?
No, there will be no further evidence today.
Thank you. Very well. We'll rise now and sit again on Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock.